Okay, Director Stigdon, whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. Thank you for having us. We are a large agency with a lot of moving parts, so I'm going to try to get through as much as we can so that we have time for questions at the end. Okay, just make sure I have this right. Okay, on the first slide, you'll just see our mission, vision, and values and our operational goals, just so you have an idea of that. I'm not going to go over them, but just note that our operational goals, we have people, service, finance, and IT goals for those. So to start with our accomplishments over the last 2 years, under child safety, we have decreased the number of children we have in care in all areas. In residential, we've decreased by 54%, and in foster care, we've decreased by 45%. In the last 10 months, we've exceeded the federal benchmark for safety of children after we've worked with them or their family. We also have an approved prevention plan. DCS received approval from HHS for our Title IV-E prevention program. It's a 5-year plan. It allows states now to use federal funding for the first time to deliver prevention services to families with a goal of keeping children safely with their families and out of foster care whenever possible. The plan outlines how DCS will utilize this funding on evidence-based programs to try to safely preserve more families whenever possible. We received approval on June of this year with the effective date of October 1st of 2021. There'll be more later in the presentation about the savings from getting this approved plan. For adoption subsidies, all adoption subsidy negotiations start at 50% no matter what the CANS level is, that's a child abuse neglect, score that is given to children based on their needs. In state fiscal year 2021, about 74% of the adoption subsidies the adoption subsidies in 2021 were about 74% of the foster care maintenance payment, and in state fiscal year 22, they were about 76%. We also have improved transparency by having public dashboards. If you go to dcs.in.gov on the very front page and you click on the button at the top, you can be taken to a dashboard that has 4 metrics that we watch. It is the first of 3 phases. You'll be notified as the second and third phase roll out. Also, for out-of-state background checks, it's been a challenge for our providers to be able to get background check information, especially from the Child Protection Index in other states. It just takes a while, but if we ask as a state for the provider, we get those results much more quickly. So we now have a person dedicated to assisting our providers on getting those the CPS history checks back in a much more timely manner. So we have improved throughput on that. We now offer pre- and post-guardianship and adoptive services. The reason this is important is that we will have children that achieve permanency through guardianship or adoption, and then after some time, due to the stressors with the family, it is considered a failed guardianship or a failed adoption, and the child ends up re-entering the system. So it's better for the child and the family if we can do what we can to help provide supports to the families during that process, and then after the case is closed for guardianship or adoption. The other thing we accomplished is we've launched studies to evaluate service provider rates. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our CFO, Aaron Atwell.
Yeah, thanks, Director. So emphasis has kind of been really on 2 areas, our home and community-based providers as well as our residential and LCPA providers. So the first that we've done is we've launched our home and community-based rate review. We've partnered with Milliman in that endeavor, which will ultimately review the amounts for which DCS pays for those home and community-based rates. So the study will recommend appropriate rates for each one of our service standards, and ultimately will recommend a method of indexing. So a little bit more about that. That's heavy provider focused. It relies on provider feedback in the form of technical work groups and also provider surveys. We'll touch on that a little bit later towards maybe the last slide, but final report implementation is due March of 23 with anticipated kind of early draft rates late December, early January. So the next focus is kind of in 2 years, but both impact our residential as well as our LCPAs. And just a reminder, our LCPA and our residential rates are based upon cost reporting. And so our emphasis has been on those cost reports. So the first one is we've been able to partner with a third-party firm that focuses on improving ultimately the cost reporting process. And that report will ultimately identify and recommend ways to simplify the rate setting process for our providers. And the last one, which has already been completed and has been effective for our rate setting calendar year of '23, is we kind of completely overhauled our residential and LCPA rate bulletins. So those are really kind of the skeletons that drive the rates for which we pay for our residential and our LCPA rates. So some highlights on that: we've been able to modernize the cost of living adjustment to be more real time. So that's updating it based upon the CPI and EPI in more real time. We've established a more flexible maximum staffing requirement. So that's a staffing ratio disallowance you may be familiar with. And a highlight there, what ultimately that's been able to do, that's been able to reduce what would have been about a $12 million disallowance down about a $1.9 million disallowance. And also, this also allows any funding that's been associated with the PPP funding or CARES Act funding to benefit the rate and not impact the provider negatively. So what we've been able to do on our end is a manual process to work with providers and ultimately allow those funding items to flow through to the rate for calendar year '23. Get back over to you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So while the Department of Child Services takes care of child support as well as child welfare, the largest part of the agency is focused on child welfare. And since we do have some new members, I'm just going to review quickly what happens in the life of the case so that hopefully a lot of this makes more sense. So first, there's a call to the hotline. And at that point, there is a decision made to either screen in or screen out the call, the allegation that's made. All the decisions, whether it's screened in or screened out, goes to the local office of the county of the allegation. The county then reviews the screen outs to confirm if it should be screened out, because sometimes at the local level, they know a little bit more about the families and may have more information and may want to actually change that to a screen in. Any call that is screened in becomes an assessment. The family case managers respond to initiate an assessment within either 2 hours, 24 hours, or 5 days, depending on the urgency of the situation. Then at that point, the decision is made whether or not the child can be kept safe at home, or whether or not they can, if we need DCS involvement or court involvement or not. If we don't need DCS involvement or court involvement, the assessment is closed. If the case needs to be opened and the child can be safe at home, then we refer to Indiana Family Preservation Services. If not, then the child is removed for their safety, and we attempt to place the child with relatives or people that they know. And if not, then they are placed in what is known as traditional foster care. Once the child is removed, the case then moves toward either reunification, which are the majority of our cases closed that way, guardianship, or adoption. And the case is closed if the Indiana Family Preservation Services are successfully completed. And we continue to watch those cases, excuse me, God bless you, after those are closed, just to make sure they're still successful and we close them in the right way. So now just to review some key metrics over the years. The Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline is staffed by family case managers who are specially trained to speak with the callers about potential abuse or neglect of a child. They gather a lot of information and actually have a decision-making tool to determine whether or not they're going to screen an assessment or not. The hotline is managed 24/7. The average time to answer calls is around 16 seconds for a general caller, and for law enforcement, it's around 15 seconds. The hang-up rate is extremely low because of that rapid response rate. Our hotline workers are spread out around the state versus having a centralized call center. As far as assessments opened each month, you can see here that we have a pretty noticeable trend throughout the calendar year. During the summer months, we have less calls to the hotline. Educators are our highest report source. We have been working to narrow the front door of the child welfare system to make sure that there are services available in the communities for families to access, so that just if they're in need but there is no abuse and neglect, that they can have access to those. For the total DCS cases, we continue to trend down. If you look, you can see the informal adjustments, which were a lot wider or a a lot higher in 2019 and fiscal year 2020. That's really due to the length of the case, not necessarily the number of families that are served. For the family preservation services are for informal adjustments and for in-home chins or child in need of services as determined by the court. For the average time for the informal adjustments and in-home chins, they are now approximately 160 days for the length of the case, which is down from 200 days for informal adjustments and down from 220 days for in-home chins. The total informal adjustment cases since the launch of family preservation, we've served 4,800 families involving almost 9,000 children. For children in foster care, these are the children that are removed. We're separated it out so that you can see how many children are with relatives or people that they know and are in traditional foster care and residential or other. Other would include children that are in maybe an acute care setting, such as a hospital or another place where they might be receiving treatment that doesn't fall under the other three categories. A little over 50% of our children in foster care are placed with relatives or people that they know. Our unlicensed relatives are not paid for their care of the children. They don't receive a per diem as licensed foster parents do. They do receive some support for clothing and bedding and for childcare, and if they qualify, they do receive a CCDF. As far as unlicensed relatives getting licensed, we waive as much as we can, but we still must meet the federal requirements even with those waivers. And we also have a lot of relatives that don't want to get licensed because they're only there to help the children that they know or the children in their family versus being open to have a license to bring in other children in foster care. As far as adoptions by state fiscal year, November's adoption month, and that's where most of our adoptions occur. So far, the adoptions we have for this calendar year, because we typically look at this summer by calendar year, but want to be consistent in how we present the data to you, our adoptions for 2022 year-to-date are 1,810. And we, in state fiscal year 2022, we averaged 17,500 adoption subsidies with an average amount being about $546 per month. As far as caseload carrying family case managers, at the end of state fiscal year 22, we were 207 family case managers short based on the caseload standard of 12-12-13. 12-12-13 stands for 12 assessments, 12 families, or 13 out-of-home children. As of November 30th this year, we had 1,491 case-carrying family case managers. We needed 1,708. We were 217 FCM short. We have 123 in training, and so we need an additional 94 family case managers to be in compliance. We continue to use creative recruitment methods and work on improving retention. As far as issues and challenges that we face as an agency, recruitment and retention of family case managers and attorneys continues to be a challenge. To give you an idea of our workforce challenges, we added 591 family case managers in the first 11 months of the year. We lost 774. It's a net loss of 183, and that's just family case managers. It doesn't include any support staff needed to ensure that the case is moving along. We did a little better on the attorney front. We added 38 attorneys in the 11 months of the year and lost 40. It's an ongoing challenge, but we look forward to seeing the impact on a lot of changes at the end of the year on both of these fronts. Another challenge is access to appropriate treatment for youth with complex needs. We have children that have experienced extreme abuse or maybe extreme neglect. They may have been in the foster care system for a lot longer than we want them to be and experience additional trauma. And with those complex needs, whether they're mental health needs or behavioral health needs, it is challenging to find appropriate treatment for those children. Another challenge is support for unlicensed kinship caregivers. And like I said before, I say relatives and people that they know, that's what is included under kinship under the federal definition. So in addition to family members, it could be a coach, a neighbor, teacher, someone that the child knows that would be willing to take in the child during the time of the case. Families say yes to keeping children in their homes, and these families are the ones that answer the phone and they say yes right away without any preparation. And so it creates stress that they have added onto their responsibilities. A lack of funding for these caregivers contribute to their stress, and it can lead to disruptions in placements. We do have children that are with relatives, and due to the stressors, sometimes enter traditional foster care because of that. Provider workforce, just like everyone else, we have all had difficulty recruiting and retaining staff to support families and children. The key piece about the provider workforce issues is that in order to get services to the children and the families in a timely manner so that we can move the case along and make sure they're being served in the right way so we can hopefully close the case, the providers need to have the workforce in order to support the family as well. So the workforce issues on both sides are a challenge for the agency and for the child welfare system. And then foster parent recruitment. While we have a good number of foster parents, we still have about 30 to 40% of children in foster homes that have to leave their county of residence due to not having an available appropriate foster care or foster home in their county, which means that it makes it a little bit more of a challenge for reunification because we have to make sure that there's visitation and family time available for those children to be with their parents as we're working toward that effort. But our school-age children, they experience the stressors of having to leave their friends in their school, and they struggle in school because they have to leave their school and try to start over in another environment where they don't know anyone. So the more foster parents we can have, the better we can match children into a home where they could hopefully be in their county of residence and hopefully have better outcomes. Now I will turn it over to Aaron Atwell.
Yeah, thanks, Director. So the next couple of slides will go through kind of historically DCS and our funding sources, how we spend our funding. We'll cover from a high level our budget request, and then get into some of the moving parts within our budget, then ultimately dive into some detail on our change package request, as well as some budget changes. So you can see that we're on slide 14. This covers our funding sources. And in state fiscal year 22, almost 61% of our funding came from state funding sources, and another 39 to 40% came from federally allocable sources there. And that's been the trend really since 2019, with kind of a little bit of a spike in 2020. So we're doing everything that we can to continue leveraging our federal funding opportunities. Next, we kind of go through over the kind of state fiscal year 21 and 22, how we spend the funding that we just covered on DCS's budget. So 63 to 63.4% over the last two completed state fiscal years has gone out towards service and service spend. So service spend would include the likes of your home and community-based providers, residential and LCPA providers, our county support for our child support enforcement, as well as kind of like our adoption, as well as our guardianship payments that are out there. 22, about 21 to 22% goes to fund our frontline field and legal staff. About 4.5 to 4.8% has gone out to support staff payroll. That's likes of like our comms team, fiscal teams, training teams, et cetera. And then 10.4 to 10.5% goes to cover our general overhead and administrative expenses associated with utility, facility costs, leases, costs associated with technology, and ultimately costs that go to front kind of like our frontline casework, such as mileage, training, as well as travel. And it also goes to cover some items that I think Zach had talked about in terms of like your IoT, your SPD, some of your internal agency chargebacks that I believe you guys heard about maybe last week on some of those internal agency charges. So we just want to kind of give you a breakdown of how we spend our funding, and ultimately historically 84 to 88% of DCS's budget funds service providers as well as our frontline staff. And ultimately, those have a direct impact of case outcomes. So slide 16, pretty simple slide, but what it goes through is kind of just our overall request from the general fund, and kind of walks you through the budget development as well as the budget instructions. So the base calculation was which was ultimately our state fiscal year 23 appropriation was $885.6 million. The request for state fiscal year 24 from the general fund is $927 million, and for 25, $931.4 million. And we'll get into kind of some of the moving parts as well as the details a couple slides later. But next, I wanted to kick it back over to the director. She's mentioned some of our accomplishments on our prevention plan. So we want to go a little bit more in depth on how that impacts DCS's budget and some of the items surrounding that.
Okay, in 2018, the Federal Family First Prevention Services Act was signed. And it was designed to overhaul the child welfare systems throughout the country. So at its core, the act is intended to focus resources on preventing child maltreatment and reduce the use of congregate care or residential care facilities. An approved prevention plan is a requirement in order for a state to be able to draw down federal funds to support these efforts. The interesting thing about our plan is that we were the first plan in the country to have a community pathway, allowing families who do not have an open DCS case or any DCS involvement at all to receive Title IV-E supported services through our Healthy Families Indiana program. The great thing about Healthy Families Indiana is that it's available in every county in the state. Our approved services are delivered to families through the Indiana Family Preservation Services Program, which has helped to reduce the number of children in foster care and to do it safely. Now, we can only continue to pull down 4E funds for children in residential treatment if we have a child that's eligible as far as the 4E eligibility, and it's an eligible place for them to be. The residential facilities have to become a qualified residential treatment program in order to be eligible for the Title IV-E funding. The challenge is that every qualified residential program needs to be evaluated to determine whether or not it is an IMD or an institution of mental disease. The catch is that if an QRTP is an IMD, it prohibits the facilities from using Medicaid dollars to provide services to children, such as health care, dental care, or any other services they might need that would qualify for Medicaid reimbursement. You'll hear, we've worked with FSSA, we've also worked with the State Budget Agency to make sure that we can continue the current level of support for kids in this type of setting, and you will see a proposal a little bit later from FSSA in this space regarding the Medicaid.
All right, so the next slide on 18 kind of goes in depth and detail some of the moving parts associated with DCS's 24 and 25 budget. I'm not going to go through every single line because we'll get into that on the next slide. But it takes into consideration the base budget as well as the ability for DCS to leverage additional federal funding that we've not been able to leverage in the past by the way of the 4E prevention funding that the director just talked about. So you can kind of see what some of our asks are there, as well as an ask for fully funding of the compensation study, some of the internal charges, and some programs that we'll get into a little bit on the next slide. So that kind of gives you a breakdown of some of the moving parts and pieces within DCS's budget. So, you're good. So to go in a little bit more in depth on kind of what we're asking for the next biennium, the first one is the ability to establish an operating margin for our nonprofit LCPA as well as our residential providers. So establishing that operating margin for these providers would allow for the program expansion as well as promote recruitment and retention of staff, and ultimately serve our youth that are in that setting. This speaks to the issue earlier that the director hit on about the inability to access residential treatment for our high acuity and complex youth. It also addresses a parity issue with our for providers as well as our nonprofit providers. So according to Indiana code, we have to make an adjustment within the rate setting process for for-profit providers. So us being able to issue this operating margin, or the ability to issue this operating margin, would bring parity to the same type of providers who operate within the same space. The next one that we're requesting is an increase to our foster care maintenance payment rate. So this speaks to the issue of being able to address the challenge of recruiting high-quality foster homes. So over the last year or so, we've kind of evaluated all rates, including our foster care maintenance payment rate. And what we did was we benchmarked ourselves against the 10 most comparable states and for our basic foster care entry rate, and come to find out that the state of Indiana is about in the 30 to 35th percentile on our entry rate, and this would allow us to get up to the 50th percentile for that maintenance payment rate. The next budget change or request that we are requesting is the ability to establish a monthly stipend for our unlicensed kinship caregivers that the director talked about a little bit earlier. So we recognize that placement in a relative or kinship home allows the child to maintain those family connections as well as traditions. So this would represent about a $300 a month stipend for those homes. The next request is continue investing in our programs that ultimately We're in connection with the Hoosiers Family First Fund. So those will be continued to fund the increases in our non-recurring legal expenses associated with our adoption program as well as our guardianship program, and continue to support our expansion of the Healthy Families Indiana program that the director talked about a little bit earlier. The next change in DCS's budget is request to fully fund the compensation study that was rolled out, I believe, November of this year, fully impacted November of this year, as well as fund the 5% increase for health, dental, and vision, as well as 8% increase in our SBDC charges. Last but not least, want to give you an update on where we stand with our implementation of the home and community-based rate study that we mentioned a little bit earlier. So we are currently working with a third-party analysis to kind of review those rates, and we're working in partnership with state budget agency who do anticipate on having an adjustment in the governor's recommended budget that will be shared at the beginning of January to react to some of those changes. We recognize that on our home and community-based providers, outside of kind of the budget changes in the last budget cycle, they've not had an overhaul of their rates, and we want to ensure that what we're paying is accurate and fair there. So as I mentioned earlier, we anticipate draft rates being out late December, early January. And we hope to see, we will see a recommended budget request for that adjustment moving forward.
All right, thank you. At this time, we can take any questions.
Yeah, so I'm getting a lot of members that are asking me about the reimbursement for I think it's the home-based care providers. And I guess they're coming to me telling me they haven't had an increase in years and they want to, so I think what I heard, you're doing a study on this, on the rate reimbursement?
Yes, sir.
Okay, because I'm just telling you, I have a lot of members coming to me and asking me about those rates. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one quick point on that. I don't think by the time we produce the governor's budget first week of January, we'll have the exact results of that study yet, but we're going to set aside some money in the governor's budget for what we believe the approximate cost of that might be. But I think we'll have to work out the kinks in that as the budget bill advances through the process.
And then I see the 45% reduction in the number of children in foster care. And so I also have a lot of members coming to me telling me, you know, we need more foster parents, we need more subsidies for that. So if the number's going down, why would we need more people and more subsidy for that?
So while we have less children and we have foster parents turnover as well, we have foster parents that adopt and choose not to foster anymore. And what we're trying to do is have children to be able to be in foster care within the county they reside, at least, to have 30 to 40% of them having to go to another county, some of them several counties away, to an available foster home is a real challenge for us in our efforts to help get toward case closure and ensure child safety.
So it's probably fair to say you have enough foster parents, but maybe not in certain areas. So you have
Correct.
too many maybe in one area and not enough in another. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
That is correct.
Okay. And then I'm also going to be asked the question, the same thing. So reduction in the number of kids you're servicing, but then your, request is going up for more money. So how would I answer that question?
Sure, yeah. So the budget is, I think back over the last 5 years, there were over 600 vacant positions that were kept vacant. And so it's been our job to right-size the budget. We had that 600 family case manager vacancy was not sustainable, especially with the number of children we've had in care. So as we work to make sure that we have the right number of family case managers to handle the cases for the children and ensure that the providers are able to provide the services to the families, what we're starting to see is maybe a right size of the budget, not necessarily looking at increase or decrease. Does that make sense? Does that help?
I'm kind of seeing that the majority of your increase is actually due to the compensation study. So it's obviously going to wages. So it looks like 90-some% of your increase is going to go to wages, if I'm reading this correctly.
Wait, which one?
The compensation study.
Yeah, so Overall, the increase is about 41, I believe right around 41 million, 34 million of that being the compensation study. But, and so that's kind of why we wanted to highlight the additional funding that we're getting from federal sources that allows us to kind of invest in some of those other programs that we highlighted here. So we do see a win in additional federal funding. So although it does look like it's just a 41 million, there's much more going on in there.
Fair enough. All right, Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you launched a new IT system. You don't have to tell me no. I'd like to know what the costs of that new system are and if any of the providers are also incurring costs to adapt to that. In addition, I'd like to know, and you probably don't have the numbers now, I'm hearing reports that some children, are staying for a period of time in the emergency shelter. What is the length of stay? That's kind of disturbing when you say we have adequate foster care. Sometimes staying in DCS offices, is that correct? Overnight?
I was writing on your question.
I mean, if this
Yes.
isn't, okay, so
Okay.
that's also disturbing, and in hotels, so I'd like to
Wait,
know,
no, we don't have any children serving in, being served in hotels.
but emergency shelters?
Correct, emergency
Okay.
shelters, and I can get you the length of time.
Because I'm hearing more than a few days. So how many foster families do you have right now?
I'll have to get that number for you.
Okay, and then what is your need? Because obviously, if they're not in the county where you'd like them, then there's a need. Next, with respect to getting back to the savings, so because the services are provided by the providers, not by case managers. So at the end, you mentioned that it's 80+% of your budget is services, but you're including the family case managers. But it's really the providers providing that. And so getting back to the rate study, I guess I'm a little concerned that we did a rate study to increase the FCM's pay and everyone up the line, I presume. But to piggyback on what Senator Mishra said, home and community-based service providers haven't received a rate increase in several years. You're aware of that. And just now you're doing a study, so we won't know that for the budget. So why did you do it that way? Why didn't you increase, since they're the ones, the front line providing services, why didn't you do a rate study for them first?
So and I can have Zach answer more about the compensation study. We did not perform the compensation study. That was a statewide study that was done. For the compensation study for the providers, we'll have that information in time for the budget.
But you knew they haven't had a rate increase for a while. So when did you start that?
So we kicked that off in September.
So a little
of
late.
This year, yeah. So we kicked it off in September. We want to make sure that we got it right. It's heavy provider focused, so we've had several technical work groups. We've had surveys, or pretty complex surveys that have gone out. And just to give you a little bit of detail, we're addressing some of the pain points that we've heard of no-shows, of shift differential, stuff like that in the survey. And so, yeah, I anticipate to having those rates fairly soon, as the director mentioned.
Okay, thank you. And I also understand, obviously, we know our schools are the biggest source of calls to the hotline. And I believe I've been told that the hotline calls are only down about 16%. Is that correct? But services referrals are down 70%. So where are those children going? Is someone keeping track of that?
Can you repeat that again? I just want to understand.
So we know the numbers are a little bit misleading to the public because it looks like the number of children in need of services going through the system or being called out, so to speak, are down. But that's because they weren't in school. And we know the schools are our biggest source of calls, right? So I'm understanding now that the children are back in school fully, calls to the hotline are not down as significantly as the calls that are receiving services. So what's changed and where are those children right now? Because I'm also hearing from providers that they feel children just aren't being counted.
That's a complicated question. So while the educators are our highest report source to the hotline, those are actually the calls that result in the lowest percentage of actual substantiation of abuse and neglect. We've been working with our community partners that are available around the state. There are primary prevention providers, and and our local offices have been working with schools to help them connect families to services that they may need, because a lot of calls to the hotline may be due to something that they don't need DCS intervention for.
Okay, so when you say your local officers, so FCMs or whoever are going into every school, if I go back to my school districts, they'll tell me that they've had constant contact with DCS so they understand what's reportable and not?
Our local office directors reach out to the schools to go in and talk to them and make sure they're aware of the process and what is available in their community. There's no guarantee that the school will actually work with the local office. So they do
Okay,
what they
well,
can.
I'm glad you mentioned schools, because I'm also hearing concerns from schools about violent and aggressive children in their classrooms. And what happens is, my understanding is that disrupts, not only does it disrupt the class, but that child, there's not a good way to remove them from the educational environment, and so the rest of the classroom may suffer. Does DCS have a line item for those kinds of children, and if not, why not?
If there's not abuse or neglect are involved, we wouldn't be involved with those children if there's not abuse or neglect from their caregiver.
Okay, and also with respect to kinship care, you're familiar with a bill that came through and we passed last year that had to do with kinship care and their relationship to DCS, are you not?
Which bill would that be?
That would be a bill about the young child who was beaten to death, and he was in kinship care by cousins or relatives. So he was not a DCS case. Well, I think it was a fairly well vetted bill, so I guess I'm glad to see that you're finally acknowledging the need for kinship care and them being reimbursed. But that gets me back to, you are very strict on tracking your providers, getting back to rate reimbursement and how they spend their hours. How are you tracking your employees' hours? Because I've had conversations with your staff about some egregious case managers who have been indicted and or fired in my neck of the woods because they weren't doing their jobs. And yet you have very strict timesheets for your providers. Are you instituting that with this new IT system for your FCMs as well?
So unfortunately, any organization is going to have a bad player or two, not just DCS, but even providers.
Right.
So as far as DCS, we have local oversight in the local office. There's also state oversight and also federal oversight in what they do. Depending on, depending on the role of the family case manager, whether they're an assessment worker or a permanency worker, that oversight varies. Assessment workers have to call in their assessments. They work directly with the supervisors who oversee their work. There's also a process where the supervisor actually goes out and shadows the family case manager, as well as calling the families to verify work or to follow up on any concerns that are have. So there's multiple levels of oversight for the family case managers.
No offense, there are
field.
multiple levels, multiple people involved, and yet kids still slip through the cracks, particularly during COVID, when the providers were there in the homes providing the services, and your case managers in some instances, according to providers, were nowhere to be found. So I would love to actually see the timesheet and where the frontline FCMs and DCS workers are actually being held accountable for their times.
I respectfully disagree. The FCMs were actually in the homes during COVID and worked very hard to try to get providers to make sure they were in the home, especially for family preservation services, which we require for them to be in the home because those children are most at risk, and we want to make sure that they're safe. So the FCMs do have to go into the home.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions. In regards to your FCMs, your family case managers, you say you need 94 to get back up to par?
Correct. With the ones that we have in training, it will take an additional 94. If we maintain and don't have any turnover, it would take 94 to get up to that number. We
Okay.
constantly watch it.
Okay, and then on slide 13, you lost 774 FCMs and frontline attorneys in the last 11 months. Those FCMs, where did they go? Did they go to the contractors? Did they leave DCS and go to private contractors, nonprofit contractors?
A variety. So family case managers will sometimes go to work for the providers that we serve. They also might go to hospital settings if they're social workers. Some of them left the field entirely and worked other jobs where they could work remotely full-time from home.
It was part of that due to remotely, excuse me, remote or also higher pay?
It could be a combination, but there's multiple reasons for it, yes. And
Okay.
it does include those.
Okay, and a couple more final questions. The kinship stipend issue, it's good to see that they're looking at $300. Is that $300 per child within that family, or is that 300 period for the month?
You want to go? Yeah.
Yeah, so we would, so on that, it would be, we got about 4,200 kids placed in, so it would be per child.
It'd be per child, and do they have to request that, or is that automatic?
Yeah, and I definitely think it'd be automatic on our end.
Okay, and so you think would that incentivize more families to take on their relatives, kids?
That is the hope, yeah.
So that's the point, okay? Because years ago, before you guys came on the scene, the other director said that people would just love to take the kids out of love, and love don't pay no bills sometimes. So I'm glad to see this is happening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen.
Senator Kadora.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Director and CFO. Thank you for your service. And I know that DCS is one of the agencies that deal with one of the most difficult tasks that a state agency can do, which is to help and serve our kids and our families. A couple of quick questions. I didn't see in the presentation performance metrics to say, for example, in the next budget, to align with these dollars, our goal is ABC. We would like to reduce the number of cases by X percentage or so on. So can you speak a little bit about that? Maybe does the agency have a strategic plan, and does that strategic plan have performance metrics that are data driven to say, here are the objectives, and with this level of funding, here's what we will be able to accomplish?
As far as decreasing the number of children, it's trying to narrow the front door to make sure that the only children that can enter actually need the intrusive intervention of the Department of Child Services. We do have a goal for that. Another goal that we're looking at is the length of the case, the length of time it takes for the case to close. That's one of our priorities this year, is to really focus on that. And we've done a lot of work to make sure that cases are closed timely and to narrow that front door. But we still do have a group of children that we need to figure out what is preventing them to get to case closure. So I would say that's one of the primary metrics we're working on as far as performance metrics.
I appreciate it. It would be helpful to include it in future presentations, and then even during the budget process, it would be helpful to tie dollars. I firmly believe budgets reflect values of organizations. So if the dollars are just being given, you might be criticized either way for either underperforming or overperforming. So it's critical to be data-driven. The second question I have, I received feedback from constituents who work with families that have substance abuse or use issues. And they told me that it's a DCS policy not to contract with contractors who provide the medically assisted treatment, the MATs, as it relates to specific medications such as the Suboxone, I think, and Methadone and a couple of others. Can you clarify the agency's policy as far as contracting with providers who can provide that medical assistant treatment for these types of families?
We do contract with providers that provide substance use disorder treatment. I'm not sure about what exactly they mean. So if you have some specific information that I can follow up on, that would be great.
Absolutely. I'll send you an email.
Thank you.
My final question, background checks. So we spoke briefly, you and I, over the last maybe year. I'm aware of a few cases that in families who either foster or adopted passed the background check, and then later they went through an instance by which they probably committed a crime. And I think the agency's policy is to perform background checks. Is it every 6 months, or is it every year, or is it at the time of every time a person adopts or fosters, even though they had a prior adoption or foster experience?
We've had some changes, and I don't want to misspeak, so let me double check and get that back to you.
I appreciate you. And to conclude, the thought here is that there were a few instances where a person would pass the background check, they would have a child under their care, they commit a crime, they abuse a child. These cases could be, might go to court, and then they come back to the system and either foster a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth child. And then I don't know if the agency performs background checks very frequently, not only at the times and the instances, but every time a person fosters or adopts. So I appreciate you following up on that.
Sure. That's a good question.
The final comment, you mentioned 770-plus positions that you lost, or family case managers. Do those numbers represent unique vacancies, or is that the number of turnover and a limited number of positions, meaning like, was it 100 positions and you had 700 people turnover in those positions, or are these 770-plus actual positions?
Those were the actual people that turned over.
Do you know how many positions do they represent?
Oh, no, I'd have to, 770 positions at the time, but I see what you mean, that it could be one position that's multiple turnover, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking?
Because to me, for example, if you're an agency of 1,000 people, as an example, having 70% turnover is a crisis. But
Right.
if it's only 100 positions and you had 776 people turnover in those positions, that gives a different understanding. You mentioned right-sizing the budget, and I think, can you confirm what I've heard is that basically you had 600 vacant positions that either were not funded or were they not funded or were they not filled?
Yeah, so I know that they weren't filled. As far as being funded, I don't believe they were funded either. This was as a result of the Child Welfare Policy and Practice Group evaluation in 2018, looking at what is it that we need to do to get up to our caseload standard and recommending an appropriate caseload standard for the family case managers.
So I appreciate your answer when you said we might be going up in cost, but that does not necessarily mean we're increasing. Maybe we did not fund appropriately for years, and when we're trying to right-size the ship and the budget, we might still need maybe $100 or $200 million to be where we need to be at. So we might experience an increase, but we're still going through the process of right-sizing that budget. Is that reasonable?
Yes, that's reasonable.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else? All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Next, we have IEDC, Secretary Chambers, and David Rosenberg. So I'm going to say after one, we're now 20 minutes behind. So I'm going to have to stay on a 30-minute hard stop, and we're just going to have to ask some of our questions with meetings with the agencies or something, because we're already scheduled to be here till 5. We'll be here till about 8. So we're starting at 11:20, so we'll have a hard stop in 30 minutes.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning. Chairman Mitchell, thank you, and members of the Budget Committee. Happy to be back this year. I am 17 months on the job. The governor 17 months ago asked if I would leave the private business I was in to run the state's economy as a Secretary of Commerce, and I answered that call as a volunteer, and I'm proud to give you the results of the last 17 months. I'm an Indiana guy, Indiana University graduate, entrepreneur in the state of Indiana. I've been a business owner for 38 years. As I approached the challenge ahead, it was important to build a great team, to show up with a plan, and to shoot higher and run faster as a state in the state economy. We wanted to compete with the best states in the country for economic development, focus on quality over quantity, and focus on wages and careers more than just jobs, lifting people up through higher wages, putting more money in Hoosier pockets. With that strategy in mind, we rolled out a 5E plan, the IDC's roadmap to creating a more prosperous Indiana by focusing on the built environment, investment in built environment, cities, towns, quality of life, and you guys have already been down that road with READY, but also LEAP in our strategic sites program. READY is, I say this when I'm out in public, that the legislature and the governor's creation of the READY program, I think, is a nationally innovative program and super effective in population growth, workforce growth. So READY 2.0 is super important. Our second E is building an economy of the future, going out to get the economy we want, being prescriptive about the economy we want, building an economy for 2032, not just an economy of 2022. Focus on entrepreneurship. My aspiration would be that Indiana is a top 5 state in the country for entrepreneurship. I don't think there's a more important investment we can make. focusing on the energy transition and how our state and our advanced manufacturing DNA can support industry looking to serve the energy transition as well as our sources of clean energy. And then telling the Indiana story through external engagement. Those are our 5 E's. The 5E strategy for the last 17 months is producing results. Indiana is having a record year. Of course, this year's success is not the IEDCs alone. It takes a village, and there is no I in team and all of that, all the work that this body has done for decades to put us in good condition. But we are excited about the results of this 5E strategy. Previous year record in 2021, really before my time, was $8.7 billion in investment, economic investment in the state, committed investment in the state. I'm proud to report that this year we've committed $22.2 billion with wages that are 30% higher than any previous year, really focused on careers of the future and not just jobs, focused on high wage growth industries, biopharma, semiconductors, and electric vehicle batteries. Statewide distribution for that $22 billion is also a focus for us. This year's investment have occurred in 53% of Indiana counties, with $11 billion of the $22 billion being invested in rural and mixed rural areas. That's an important issue. So new industries for the state include EV batteries and semiconductors. A sampling of the transactions include Elanco and Corteva announcing their global headquarters based in Indiana, a real focused and emerging leadership in agro-bioscience. Lilly's $2.1 billion investment in Boone County, the largest investment Lilly's made outside of their corporate campus in over 2 decades. SkyWater, the first major semiconductor after launching our AMP Semiconductor Task Force in the spring. SkyWater announced $1.8 billion commitment to West Lafayette, Indiana. In addition to SkyWater, we have 6 other high-wage paying semiconductor businesses sprinkled around Indiana, from Odom all the way up to Lafayette, MediaTek being one of those. And then Stellantis, Samsung, SDI, joint venture for electric vehicle batteries with a $2.5 to $3 billion investment, and that continues to grow every day with suppliers flooding to the state of Indiana to support electrical vehicles. Recently, Rolls-Royce announced that they will be making the B-52 fighter plane engine. That's a 50-year commitment by the military, and that is going to continue to support high-wage jobs in Indiana, and Rolls-Royce is investing $1 billion in Indiana to do that. And then the READY projects have commenced across communities across the state. During the 22 legislative session, the General Assembly enabled the IDC to punch above our weight and truly meet the demands of a rapidly changing economy. You all approved and supported Innovation Development Districts, a first-of-its-kind program in Indiana that has enabled us to compete for mega projects with higher wages. Establishing a $300 million credit allocation and passing other programmatic changes that have made our toolkit responsive to the business community, and then cash augmentation that supports many of the economic development priorities. The market has responded to these tools that you have given us. While Indiana is winning right now, our economy is booming. I have heard of the impending short-term recession. However, I also know that these industries are fueled by the federal spending of the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, and infrastructure bill. And these are long-term industrial partners that play through short-term recessions. Our pipeline at the IDC of high-wage, future-focused industry growth is, I would say, robust is an understatement. So the IDC must be ready to meet these demands so Indiana can lead the way in these emerging sectors, not just so that our GDP can grow, but to secure our economy of the futures. We think there's $2 trillion of advanced manufacturing opportunity throughout the United States, and they're going to land somewhere, and they're going to be in those locations for decades and decades to come, and we want that to be Indiana. The competition to land new investment is heating up as companies look to onshore. And according to our taxonomy study that we did to evaluate the landscape, We compared Indiana to our competing states, and we ranked 10th out of 11 in total expenditures for economic development. With your support and increased allocation, the IEDC can continue to have record years and provide high-paying jobs for all Hoosiers. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here today. I am deeply appreciative of your thoughtfulness, dedication, and support to the IEDC. I will now turn the microphone over to David to take it from here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. As the Secretary mentioned, your leadership and help allowed us to achieve unprecedented momentum in 2022. We know what tools work and what the market needs to see. And so for our budget request, we are not asking for wholesale changes to these tools, but asking you to continue to invest in what is working and what has led to this unprecedented momentum. So we'll walk through how those tools worked for 2022 and how those tools will be used over the next 2 fiscal years. For 2022, the legislature approved a $300 million augmentation to our Business Promotion Innovation Fund for deal closing and additional programming. This helped close $6 billion of CapEx investment and allowed additional investments in entrepreneurship, international flight pursuits, and redevelopment. The fund was extremely helpful, but the market demand was extremely high as well, and we have committed that almost that entire fund not even halfway through our fiscal year. And the demand remains high for next year with over $100 billion in potential deals in the pipeline, and we need to continue to make investments into this fund to meet the demands of the market. This shows how the fund has been utilized this fiscal year, July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2023. As you can see, majority of the fund is focused on the deal closing with also the additional programmatic aspects of entrepreneurship, marketing, and population growth. And this double clicks on the investments being made into entrepreneurship, both building out the ecosystem, adding additional capital opportunities for business, and ensuring that we have resources to capture more than our fair share at the federal funding level. Second major area of investments is strategic sites and an infrastructure fund. Last year, the committee and OMB were extremely helpful in providing resources to secure this land, and we cannot thank you enough for that. This has been key for the investments of Elanco at the GM stamping plant and at LEAP for Eli Lilly. And again, we thank you for this. We know this was not the ideal structure last year, and as such, a dedicated fund would help in securing additional resources for LEAP and other potential sites around the state. So why is this fund important? As a little background, we're investing in the Strategic Sites Initiative because speed is the new incentive. Deals that used to take 2 years to complete are now taking 6 months. Other states are making large investments in this area, and we need to show the market that we have the sites under control with plans for utilities and infrastructure so that they're confident in making their investment in Indiana. Our first strategic site is the LEAP development in Lebanon. This is a high-wage economy of the future focused research and innovation district. Its focus is bio-life science, microelectronics, EV battery, and ag tech. These are high-wage, high-paying jobs that are true careers and not just jobs. We'll have research and development lab space on site. It will not be your traditional business park. It'll be a key focus on aesthetics, with sustainable development, streams, walking paths, large setbacks from the community, tree-lined roads. We'll have a center for excellence in training on site in partnerships with K through 12 and university institutions to train the workforce of the future. And then this is also a long-term regional generational water solution for the entire central Indiana region that is spurred by this economic development investment. So this is a long-term visioning exercise, a very conceptual layout of how this site could be used. This represents about 12,000 acres. We do not have 12,000 acres under contract. The site will be developed as the market demands and as companies continue to show interest. The first hallmark investment in the district occurred with Eli Lilly and their $2.1 billion investment. That is going in the purple section on the northeast corner across 65 there. That's 602 acres that they're investing in. The next phase that's being developed as of this week, approved by the City of Lebanon for annexation and zoning, is the southwest portion, the larger purple mega sites. These are 1,000+ acre sites that'll be used for manufacturing of the microelectronics, EV battery, bio-life science, and in those industries of the future. And then kind of the third phase development you'll see in the yellow, which is along the Big Four Trail. That'll be where the mixed-use residential is, amenities, research and development, education space, for people to live, work, play, stay, raise their family right here in the community and really be a workforce and population growth attraction. Here's a conceptual rendering looking from Lebanon to the northwest. As you can see on the right side of the page is the Eli Lilly, 602 acres. Then as you cross 65, you get into the mixed-use village, advanced manufacturing, and the mega sites. And then again, zoomed in, you can see the tree line pass, large buffers from the property edge to the buildings. But again, focus on aesthetics with steel, concrete, glass, really high construction. And then looking at the mixed-use village section, again, as a population and growth attraction, but a place where young, talented individuals want to live, grab coffee, run into their colleagues, and a space where people want to locate to. So next we'll jump to Ready. As Secretary mentioned, this is a truly innovative, first-of-its-kind initiative that has been hugely successful. The demand has absolutely overshot even what we had expected. As you know, it was a $500 million investment. There were 17 regions that were formed, and we had $1.5 billion worth of requests from those regions for the Ready funds. And so our team did a great job working with the regions and narrowing that list down to the initial 500. But like you said, that demand is absolutely there. And the program has been an absolute success. As of today, we have 269 Ready projects that have been submitted to the portal, accounting for about $414 million of the $500 million in allocated Ready funds. Incredibly importantly is that this has had a huge leverage ratio. Again, under the law, the leverage ratio needed to be 4-to-1 from outside funds matching state dollars. As we sit here today, we're over 15 times of a leverage ratio on the investment of the state, which accounts for almost $7 billion of quality of place population growth investments that are happening in cities and towns throughout all 92 counties. There's a few project highlights here, and there'll be more to come as we go through Q1 of 2023 with more groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings to come. And then last, our Manufacturing Readiness Grant Program. This was enacted in early 2022. Since the announcement of projects on June 30th of 2022, again, has been a unadulterated success. We've had 60 counties represented, 212 awards. That $17.4 million in state grant funding has had a 7-to-1 ratio, almost 8-to-1, and accounted for nearly $140 million worth of outside investment with that matching grant. And so this is a move to Manufacturing 4.0, automation and efficiency, which will help grow the state's economy, especially with the low employment we're experiencing now. Companies need to automate, and this is a very key tool for them to be able to do that. So again, we thank you for your support, your continued support, and happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Reporter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, Director. Quick question. In Senate Bill 382, and we had a lot of discussion about that last year, that at a regular session, it provided some type of option for a major corporation to calculate their methodology in regards to their taxes down the road. Do we know who that company is? And in regards to this development?
I will have to go back and look at the bill. I do not remember 382 as we sit here today, but I'm happy to check into that and respond.
So you don't remember something of that magnitude in that bill? It was put in late.
As we sit here today, no, sir, I don't, but I will check with our team and get you a response.
Any other questions? Senator Cadora?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. David, Commissioner, thank you. I'll be very brief and quick on my questions. Who owns the land in Lebanon? Is it the state? Is it the community? And I know that dealing with economic development projects before and all is at the city. I know that you need more flexibility, and sometimes things are not available for the public to discuss while a deal is being negotiated. But there are so many questions about that deal and the return on investment. And I've seen some public criticism for the amount of money that the state is putting in this project, with some promises of the the proposed wages that will be earned at that facility. I know it's too early for anyone to make assessments of what that project is going to look like, but I personally heard from people in that community outside of my district and from within my community on this topic. So who owns the land? How much more money do you need? And how much did we spend so far?
So the LEAP Innovation District is a investment, and not just a cost, that'll generate returns to the state for decades and decades, not only in the return of the land investment, but also in the support of higher wage jobs. The community of Lebanon has been an incredible partner and has been in lockstep with us all the way through the inception, through zoning and the launch of this project. So, we're very pleased with the use of the IDD tool in our interactions with the community. We're excited about the long-term potential of this asset, the state asset. It is a long-term investment. It's not going to show results. I mean, we're pleased with the short-term results of Eli Lilly's $2.1 billion investment in the $110,000 jobs that they're going to generate. We think there's more to come. We know there was more to come. The pipeline of industry that's kind of lining up, looking at that site, is really exciting for us and for the state. So,
I appreciate that. Are you going to come back and ask for more money for that project?
yes.
Do we know how much that's going to be?
We're working on the long-term strategy for that, whether it's cash or it's bonding, but that project will also start throwing off revenue.
Correct.
Fairly soon, in the short term, right, 2 or 3 years out. And then it'll be self-fulfilling over the long run because of the revenue generated by the site.
I appreciate you. As a member of this committee, it's important when we go back to our constituents, as the stewards of taxpayer dollars, that we are able to answer questions about how much we're investing, why, and what is the return investment. My second question, Corteva 2 weeks ago announced cutting 600 jobs. So we confirmed the headquarters, but we're losing jobs. Any updates on that?
We don't. They're having, an adjustment based on some of the macro challenges in the economy. Quite frankly, Indiana, there's a few other companies in Indiana that are tightening up. We still have a very tight labor market in Indiana right now, and we don't have any insight into that global tightening by that company. We are glad and pleased that they, relocated and pulled jobs out of the Northeast and decided Indiana is the place for them to have their global headquarters. And they're just having some adjustments right now, and we don't have any concerns about their future in Indiana.
I appreciate that. I hope that we can track. I know, again, working for the city of Indianapolis, if folks don't fulfill their economic deals, I think we should go back and revise these contracts and look at what they owe the state and the taxpayers for promises that were made before. My final question, my understanding is that 95% of all new jobs in Indiana are created by small businesses. I didn't see anything. There are mega deals in IEDC's plans, and I appreciate that. I'm very supportive of IEDC. But what are we doing for small businesses, and what barriers are we removing, especially when I constantly hear that we have the brain drain problem in Indiana?
Yeah.
We're investing hundreds of millions of dollars on capital, but we need to invest a little bit more in the brains and the intellect of the workforce.
Such a good question. It's an essential question, and it's covered by our 5E strategy in a couple of different ways, but entrepreneurship is critical to the state of Indiana. I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm obviously passionate about that, but there's other entrepreneurs by the name of Eli Lilly, who's now the 25th largest company in the world. So entrepreneurship is super important. The manufacturing readiness grants, those are usually invested with small to medium-sized manufacturing entrepreneurs. So those are super important to allow those old line advanced manufacturing businesses to increase their efficiency through technology. So that's an investment in entrepreneurship. We have record funding of our small business development organization, over $99 million going out, and those guys are having great success supporting small businesses statewide. We are increasing funding to TechPoint's training for young people to get trained and placed with internships. We are creating an entrepreneurship portal, statewide portal. We're trying to lead on this, where if you're a junior at Lawrence Central or you're a senior at Ball State, you can go onto this portal and you can figure out how to find resources, how to patent a product, how to find a lawyer, how to find a mentor. So we're really trying to put infrastructure in place to cultivate entrepreneurship and then support them with funding. So, and that's, all across the board. So work in progress. We have some momentum. We need continued support for that because that's important.
I appreciate you and thank you for your service.
Senator Melton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for your testimony today. Just a few questions. You mentioned we've spent $414 million out of the $500 million for the READY grant. With the balance of the $86 million, what's the timeline and the plan to kind of allocate those dollars?
Yeah, that'll be allocated by first quarter of 2023.
Okay, so you know who's pretty much going to get those, or there's still a process in place?
Yeah, each of the 17 regions had their allocation based on their submissions. It was a competitive process, and so we are tracking and have continual, almost weekly meetings with the regions to ensure they fulfill their full commitment.
Good. If there's a situation where a region may not receive their matching dollars, how do we handle that? If let's just say one of their funding sources doesn't come through, if it's federal or et cetera?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we work with Ernst & Young as our federal compliance check, and so we would work with them in the region. Like I said, we have done monthly trainings and meet with the regions almost weekly to make sure we are ahead of any issues that may arise. And so we'll handle that case by case. We require on the upfront submissions on the matching grants and commitments there. And also it is performance-based, and so our ready dollars only go in once we receive the invoices that the projects are underway.
Got it. All right, great. Couple other questions. Wanted to see, from last session, Senate Bill 366, I know we've deployed or implemented the film tax credit program. I've seen that the site is up. Any updates on how that is going, and if folks have utilized it from the film and entertainment industry?
Yeah, Senate Bill 361 was incredible.
61,
Yeah. Want to make sure I was tracking that one.
Yeah,
No.
sorry.
No, there's been a lot of interest, and we're working closely with the universities, especially IU, on how to roll that out. We've had both film, media, music come to the table. I think we may come back for a few tweaks on that to make it more marketable to the industry, but there has been a great deal of interest, and that's part of the marketing strategy, telling Indiana's story throughout.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the marketing strategy on that and how I would get the word out. Just last two questions I have. I believe around 2017, 2018, we had the Entrepreneur and Enterprise Districts. I think it was a pilot program for Fort Wayne and Lafayette. I was just curious if we have any data or the success of those programs. I'm not expecting you to have that now, but I'd love to get an update and see how those are going, and if there's opportunity to replicate that in other parts of the state.
Absolutely. We have our entrepreneur and innovation team in the room, and so we'll make sure we take note and get you an answer on that.
Okay, last question I have. Last budget session, we put the $1.2 million for the study for the Buffington Harbor project in my district. I know that the consultant has been identified. Just trying to get an update on that whenever you get a chance. I know we reached out to the team around October for an update. We haven't heard anything yet. So just curious on the process and the progress of it. So just let it get caught up to speed on that.
Yes, sir. We'll get you an update on that.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else? Senator Brown?
Thanks very much. One quick question. I forgot about the music piece. As you know, Purdue Fort Wayne up in my neck of the woods has a very robust music program. So when I hear you say you're working closely with IU, I'm sure you just forgot to mention Purdue Fort Wayne because of our amazing partnership in Sweetwater, et cetera, up there.
Absolutely. And Senator
Right.
Bush has been a great advocate of that program, working closely with them, Sweetwater, and others up in that area.
Anyone else? All right, thank you. 4 minutes
Thank
under. All right. Next up, we have Department of Education and Dr. Jenner.
Yes, sir. I will absolutely keep that in mind and respect your time, certainly. Are you ready for us to get started? Well, thank you, Senator Mishler and members of our state's budget committee. I know that you're hearing a lot of good proposals being considered, and I really respect the decisions that you'll be making in the coming months with hopefully a positive fiscal report coming out in December. We have, as a team, not seen that revenue report, and noting that we are half of the state budget, we know that that revenue report is very, very important to determine what the tuition support equation looks like and whether money goes additionally to areas like CTE, special education, complexity, or foundation. So we are eager, once that report comes out, to work directly with you to work on increases in that space. Today, I'll talk about areas outside of the budget specifically. I will start by level setting our vision for K-12 education. I'll do that very quickly because I know we are on a time schedule. But our vision for K-12 education really informs some of the asks that you're going to hear from us. I'll also share some of the tactics that we have deployed as well as budget requests. And as I've shared with all of you in the room, at any time we are available to meet to discuss data or any information that we share today. When we started as a team, we launched 3 pillars of focus: student learning and opportunity, educator talent, quality and value, and system alignment and capacity. In education, it's so easy to try to boil the ocean, to try to get everything done. So we really wanted to focus in on key strategy areas. I will not read all of these strategy areas to you, but we'll certainly, you have copies of this. We'll make it available to the public. And you can see our student area strategies, our educator strategic priorities to support our educator pipeline, and then our system alignment and capacity focused priorities as well. Some examples of recently deployed tactics. With all of our tactical areas, we always make sure that they do align to our strategies and that we're always supporting that focus. So above each of these areas, you will see some of the strategic alignment there. We were thrilled to announce late this summer the largest investment in Indiana's history in literacy, up to $111 million. You can see we used some of the ESSER dollars I presented to you as a budget committee last summer and shared some of the details there. Glad to get into more of that if helpful. And Lily, very thankful, provided $60 million to support, very specifically, deploying instructional coaches in the area of science of reading for our schools to provide those supports to our teachers. And also with this training, providing a $1,200 stipend to our K-3 teachers who participate. Also providing targeted support for our schools who need it the most, and then also available to everyone. Additionally, creating a literacy center at the department really focused on strategies and technical assistance for our schools. Our goal is by 2027 to have 95% of students in Indiana reading. That is an aggressive goal. I understand that. The highest we've ever been was in 2012-2013 school year. We were at 91.4%. We saw a decline since then, and then COVID further exacerbated that. So literacy has to be a priority this session. We're going to hit on a few things today and then more to come. Additionally, in the area of literacy, and I'll be frank with you, I've shared this very openly with the public. This was one thing I almost didn't say go to, and what a poor decision that would have been, because it was very successful. We offered in the spring of this past year, I Read 3 at grade 2 with the ability to build out an on-track indicator so we better understand where our students are and then can triage with resources. Why I almost said no is because I didn't want just one more test. I wanted to make sure it was intentional. So we allowed for an opt-in. We needed 30 to 35 elementary schools in our state to opt in. We had almost 400 schools opt in with a representative sample of our student populations. So I could get more into the weeds on that. You can tell I get passionate there. But just in second grade alone, we had 47% of students pass. However, we already saw the student population gaps present with our Black students and our Hispanic students. And our EL students. And so a lot of our dollars that we've targeted specifically to serve these populations. We also know that schools do so much to support our students, and we also are better for kids when we have that parent-family partnership. So we launched an initiative called Indiana Learns to provide funding for families to get high-dosage tutoring in math and reading, targeting specifically free reduced lunch population students who did not pass that iLearn assessment in the 3rd or 4th grade year. These students are often called, they were in primary grades during COVID. And so really keeping our eye close on them. I have a long list that I won't go down of schools that have opted into this. Off the top of my mind, IPS, Gary, many other schools. I'd be glad to share that list with you. And that provides a family up to $1,000 for tutoring, depending on how it's set up locally. The next one was an opportunity you provided us through HEA 1008 in the last budget session. You granted us $150 million to really deploy support for literacy and math and college career readiness through our community partners in partnership with our schools. Couple success stories I'll mention. One, right here in Marion County, you had United Way of Indiana in partnership with the Mind Trust, in partnership with several traditional public schools as well as charter schools. Really focusing on that summer learning. They saw significant gains in specifically literacy and math. Be glad to share that with you. Another success story was out of St. Joseph County. If we're thinking about return on investment, St. Joseph County, the Boys and Girls Club up there had a really remarkable partnership where they even scaled sites, I think over doubling the sites to serve kids, some even at the child's home school. We also were one of the first states in the country to launch an ESSER Gear federal dollars dashboard. As you, the Budget Committee, pointed out to us back, again, last summer when we presented to you, we have a lot of money flowing. Yes, we do. We wanted to provide a transparent look for all Hoosiers to be able to see what is happening with those dollars. So this is public. Anyone can see this by school corporation or by LEA. By county, by specific fund. And then we launched a second iteration a few months after to show specifically how those dollars are being spent. What code? Is it infrastructure? Is it operations? Is it learning, curriculum? So all of that's available online. And that's updated, by the way, twice per month. I had a senator ask me that a couple weeks ago. Twice per month, that's updated. Next one, Indiana GPS. You charged us in 2021 to build out a dashboard showing longitudinal data points, education to workforce continuum. You said get it done by July of 2024. We just launched that on Monday, so a year and a half before. You can now go there. We'll make sure you have a link to that. Rather than having random acts of indicators on a dashboard, we really focused in and listened to Hoosiers on the characteristics that matter most to Indiana students. And then again, that led to building out this dashboard, which is available for you today. And that, I will add, is iterative. We already have the second iteration of that dashboard coming in January. And one of the priority areas that we made sure with all indicators, you can see longitudinal data and you can see by student population. So if a school has at least 10 students of a certain student population, you will be able to see that on the dashboard. STEM. We've launched several different STEM opportunities for our schools, have several partner schools coaching or working in partnership with us to really support teachers in the areas of how to incorporate more project-based learning in STEM and that hands-on learning that we know is so important to our students. We also launched a STEM acceleration grant and continue to have our STEM certified schools. When we think about the topic of rethinking high school, and while that has had some discussion over the past few weeks, I'll tell you as educators, we've been having this discussion for months now on how we can make sure the 4 years that we have children are best used to make sure we light that fire in kids, show them their value, show them what's possible in their life, and ultimately open as many doors as we can for our kids. So there are a few ways that we've supported this. One way is through a grant called the 3E grant. All 92 counties received some 3E grant money focused on making sure kids have access to exploring, engaging, and experiencing careers. Experiencing meaning credentials of value, access to those. Means access to quality work-based learning. And again, glad to share more about that in your area. I will tell you, we had so many requests statewide for that. We had originally budgeted $25 million. I think I shared that with you when I presented last summer. We ended up doubling that money. I think we did about $54 million is what and I think we had $90 million in applications. So significant interest in this space where K-12 higher ed and workforce are working together to improve opportunities for kids. You can we have a rural early college model. There was an interest in our urban schools to provide an urban early college model, making sure courses are connected so students can earn those credentials of value. Thirdly, the employability skills grant. I think for years and years we talk about, as technology advances, students need knowledge, but it's different. They now need skills. They need to know how to collaborate and communicate. So we can say that students need skills all day long, and we should, but we also have to know how to measure it. How do we know where we are today and how are we getting better? So we have multiple school corporations piloting this across the state on how we might better measure skills and really make sure Indiana students are prepared. Crossing the finish line is something I'm going to get to shortly. When it comes to our educators, educators are number one when it comes to providing quality education for our kids. Just a sampling of a few of the things we launched. First one I'll mention is Get Your Teach On. That was one of the most highly requested professional developments from our teachers. Get Your Teach On is a fun way and a very exciting way to have professional development focused on science of reading, STEM, et cetera. Indiana Learning Lab is a 24/7 resource for our teachers. They can earn their PGPs through that site, and we also have recently launched a parent-family arm. The ISIL, we launched that last November. We now have already over 630 teachers signed up to get that special education license, and that's free to teachers. ITEL was modeled after ISIL because of its success, and that's for English learner teachers. Just for the past couple years alone, since we've been in, we've had a 38% increase in English learner certifications, but you'll see here shortly, we still have a significant need. The Attract, Prepare, Retain Summits was to just entice and empower innovation locally. In our educator pipeline, we had some incredible applications there, and that is launching as well, and we're monitoring the return on investment there. The Educator Supply and Demand Marketplace, for the first time ever, and you've seen it all over the media, the data that you're seeing about positions, whether certified or non-certified, are all from Indiana schools who are posting live on our dashboard to understand what's the demand in our educator pipeline. The supply data will come from our educator prep colleges, and that will come this winter. And then once the supply hits, the marketplace will seek to match the supply and demand. And then finally, the Teachers Who Shaped Us series is a series of interviews we do with well-known Hoosiers, Lily King, Olympian, Quinn Buckner, and others to just really empower our teachers on who has impacted them and changed their life as a teacher. So getting specifically to our budget requests, and again, to emphasize again, the formulaic request, we will be requesting an increase. I have not seen the budget report, and we'll wait to see that. We will work directly with the governor, with you as a budget committee to make those requests, and we look forward to that. But level setting our focal points ahead, and you have a copy of this presentation, so I'll just high level hit these. Early learning, literacy in STEM, rethinking high school, re-envisioning how we measure school and student performance, growing our educator pipeline, and then other topics including school safety and mental health. You'll note that a few of these topics are not directly in our ask today, and that is because state and federal dollars in some ways flow through other state agencies. So for example, early learning or mental health, that flows through FSSA as an example, state and federal dollars. So specifically though, in the area of early learning, we know that through On My Way Pre-K, and this was a study by Purdue University, that students who participate in that program perform better in comparison to their peers, specifically in the areas of identifying shapes, colors, numbers, language, and literacy skills in kindergarten. And we also know that they perform, ultimately, that continues, they perform higher on I Learn, and then there are benefits that extend beyond the individual student, including our families, schools, communities. One of the things the governor asked us to do when coming in is for DOE to really get involved in the quality aspect of this conversation, making sure that our programs are offering those quality services, quality curriculum for our students. So we used ESSER dollars to launch an Office of Kindergarten Readiness, the first that we've had at the department, and we're asking for a $500,000 year-over-year request there to continue that office. They've already been involved. We've already seen the return on that investment because they've been directly involved in ELAC recommendations. We're just leaning in big time in the early learning space. Secondly, you have the area of literacy, which I already mentioned somewhat, but I'd also say presently, and I mentioned that we've been in a decline since the 2012-2013 school year. COVID exacerbated that. We are presently sitting at a place as a state where 1 in 5 children are not reading by the end of 3rd grade. I hate sharing that data point with you. Our schools don't love that data point either. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that all of our children can read. As I mentioned earlier, the academic gaps continue to persist for our most at-risk students, of which we are laser focused on. So a couple requests in this area. The first one is to provide an early literacy achievement grant, which is basically a performance incentive to Indiana schools based on the number of students passing iRead 3 and weighted on student population needs as well as improvement year over year. I'll be very, very real with you. The way I wanted to set up that formula when we ran the data was skewed. It showed more of our affluent schools getting more dollars. We scrapped that yet another time. We scrapped that idea and went with a better way to consider this. It considers the complexity, considers EL and special education, et cetera, and that year-over-year improvement. We're requesting $10 million annually, and also you'll see in our legislative request, we were requesting that money goes straight back to teachers and not just into the general fund area, that foundation area, straight back to teachers. The second request in the area of literacy, one of the things Lilly Endowment said is, again, very, very generous with their support. But they said, if you can get a $10 million match, then we will give you an additional $10 million. So I know we've talked to Budget Committee or Zach Jackson, State Budget Director, about that and how that could look. And I think what we discussed is it could even potentially be a reversion. I'm looking at you, okay, I'm watching but you don't have to hit that now. I just wanted to, you've thought through how that could look. So next thing, crossing the finish line. I put a pin in that earlier when we talked about rethinking high school. Crossing the finish line was another big bet that we had as a team, and listening to our schools. And also knowing our educational attainment data as a state, which we know is at a decline, and we have to really get focused on college going rate and some of those topics there. So we asked in spring of 2021, we asked Ivy Tech and Vincennes University, look at all the credits across the state of what students have earned and tell us what juniors and seniors are within 1 to 3 courses of completing a credential. Because if they complete a credential, no one can ever take that away. And in the best case scenario, it's stackable in the future. It already impacts, right, the educational attainment of the person and even that local community. So they pulled their data, and thousands of Indiana students showed up in this data report, thousands, who were this close to having a credential based on the number of dual credit, the type that they had. Or even could be passing an AP exam. So then from there, we offered, launched this in April. We offered free tuition, fees, books, and other education expenses, and worked directly with our high schools and the commission and Ivy Tech and Vincennes. That first year, again, with about a month before summer, we had 275 high schools join in. We had 1,900 students participate. What we found is many of our students and families didn't even realize they were this close to completing a credential. And part of that is because we've never talked about it in that way in the high school space. So such an opportunity there. 2022, you can see the data, more than 3,300 students at over 335 high schools partnered. So again, a real opportunity for our state. So what we're asking is $2.5 million over the biennium to continue this. This specifically, again, targets that summer time period. We can mechanically do this during the school year, but that summer time period to continue students' education and, again, allow more students to complete credentials. And I have all of the student population data. Glad to share that with you if you want more information there, and what high schools participated, how many credentials earned, et cetera. Next area, special education excess cost. One thing I want to make sure that you're clear on, because I think this can be confusing in education, that budget line that says S5 special education, that's not the special education line in the formula. So the tuition support bulk, that large amount, that includes CTE and special education. So excess cost, the S5 budget amount, is really for our most at-risk special education students who may need to be placed in a residential facility. The way federal law works is schools still have to pay for all of that. And it is incredibly expensive for our schools. We have not seen an increase in this since 2014. And we most certainly with cost of increasing cost of services, but then also I'll tell you, since 2017, at different points in time, we've even had to supplement with federal dollars, depending on the need of students. So it's definitely time to increase that fund, and we're asking for a $5 million increase over the biennium. I'll tell you, and I put this on us, I've said this to our team, it's also something that we believe we need to take a look at how we're distributing that as a state. So that's something that we're owning as an action item as well. The next area is English learner support. You see this chart here. The quick way of looking at this is since 2016, we've had a 50% increase in our EL student population. So we now have over 77,500 English learner students. And the trajectory continues to go up. Currently, the funding available, we do not have the funding to even meet the statutory required amount for our EL students. So in order to meet the mathematical trajectory as well as cover the required cost, that would be about a $37.5 million increase in total. You can see that we're asking for more than that. We are asking for an increase in per pupil amount for the EL support. The reason why is one of the things you asked us to do is work with someone to assess our data. So we work with the National Center for Assessment to best understand the COVID impact. What we found is of all of our student populations, our English learners are our only population in nearly all category that are not yet stabilized in their growth. So we look at pace of growth pre-COVID. Other populations have stabilized and or have accelerated. Our English language learners in most areas are still in decline. We saw that in our state data. We also saw that in our national data with NAEP, the nation's report card. And so we believe in a stronger investment in that area. Again, note the NESP is what it'll say on your budget line. NESP is not part of the formula, which is, again, why I'm talking about that specific student population. So I will pause and would be happy to answer any questions now or certainly in the future.
I have a couple of questions, but we only have 3 minutes, so I'll just meet with you and ask my questions. So
That sounds good.
3 minutes, anybody? Senator Melton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Make it quick. Thank you for the presentation. I think it was great. I appreciate the thoughtfulness and innovation that you're bringing to some of these things. Can you define rethinking high school? Because I know that's come up in my district,
Yes.
and we've been hearing that term float around
Yeah.
last couple of months.
Yeah, I would love the opportunity to do that. Thank you. So we've started to see some schools in our state have great success, particularly in that 11th and 12th grade year, and being as intentional as possible, not just in a set of required coursework that they have to take, right, like they have always been, but the post-secondary credentials of value, quality work-based learning. So if we really think about rethinking high school, it would be that all children in our state have the access to post-secondary credentials of value by the time they graduate, high-quality work-based learning by the time they graduate, and then also, and again, we have taken this as an action item, we know that we need to look at our high school diploma requirements because right now schools have barriers to offering some of this. We have some creativity happening, but that high school diploma flexibility is also going to be really, really important as we prioritize coursework.
Right. So when I heard all of that, and I think that's helpful for me to understand, some of that sounds like the Commission of Higher Ed, some of it sounds like the Workforce Cabinet. Are there alignment in communication with all of these agencies as you're putting the plans forward?
Yes, sir, and thank you for asking that. I'll rephrase how I was going to say. I talked to all of them more than I wasn't going to say that. I don't need to say that. I talked to all of them a lot. Commissioner Lowry, and have great respect for these people. Commissioner Lowry, new Commissioner David Adams, Chairperson Ryan Kitchell, and even Secretary Brad Chambers with IEDC and the economic development. We have standing meetings and very frequent phone calls to make sure there's alignment.
Got it. Then I'll close with this. Couple of suggestions. I love the dashboard concept. I think it will be helpful for communities to have one for themselves. If there's a way that the DOE, at a request of a community, to say, can we put together a dashboard? Because there may be different educational entities, public, charter, et cetera, private, that may want that data. So something to think about there. With the decline of enrollment in students in enrolling in college, and I talked to our local universities, you know, there's conversations on how do we revisit 21st century scholars and the potential automatic enrollment for eligible students, right?
Yes.
I would hope that would mean your department probably can look at that and see how we can push forward with something of that nature. And lastly, I think, and it's just more of a comment, 1 in 5 children are mastering the foundation of reading skills is a state of emergency to me.
Yes, sir.
Because we know that that's the basics and that's the foundation. And as we look at the funding formula, I think we should look at those schools that are at the rock bottom and figure out how do we infuse more resources for them to catch up and to create more of an equitable way, making sure that children aren't left behind because they aren't reading. So just a few thoughts.
Yes, sir. Thank you. 2 comments. I'll take that as an action item on the county community level disaggregation on the dashboard. We have that on the ESSER transparency dashboard, but we don't yet have that on the GPS, so got that. Second is the 21st century scholar data. I am supportive of that. And I would also add the 21st century data is live on the dashboard that went live on Monday. So you can look at every school in the state of Indiana and see what percentage of students who are eligible are actually enrolled. That's live today. For the first time ever, you can see that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any others?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. I'll be more than happy to buy Subway for each member because this is half of the state budget and the public, we owe it to the public to have these discussions. Secretary or
Yes, sir.
Director, thank you for your service. I've been very pleased working with you in your office over the last couple of years. My question, it's mind-baffling how we talk about closing the achievement gap and talking about rethinking high school, which I'm not opposed to. We talked about that, but we need to think through the details. That we're still having debates in the state of Indiana about the value of early learning education, expanding pre-K. It's mind-baffling. I can't even logically understand when every point of research said if you want to close the achievement gap and you want kids to read by 9, it doesn't make sense to have the 7-year-old be the required age for kids to go to school or to go to early childhood education and so on. So I think I was very pleased to see that you're establishing the early learning kindergarten office or department within your agency. I will be calling for state fully funded pre-K across the state and lowering that age because again, we can't expect students to read by 9 years old if we're starting this investment at 7. And when you add the complexity of ELL, and there are growths in some of the districts, 200% growth in the ELL or even more of these students. I loved your thought of renaming the ELL funding and maybe bringing it back under the funding formula. So I'll be very supportive of those. And then a final thought, I have way too many comments to make about how excited I am about some of your ideas. But as it relates to the teacher shortage, I met with the Commission on Higher Ed, the Next Generation Hoosier Educator Scholarship, capped legislatively at 200 slots, and they told me they have about 600 people on the wait list. So I will be asking the General Assembly to remove that cap. The funding can't control that cap anyways, but there are so many ideas that we can do. It's time for bold investments. And if there's any bold investment, if we're putting $500 million in Ready 2.0 for capital, it baffles my mind how we can't put a $500 million to invest in the minds of humans who will be running these businesses and these corporations. So this is not criticism of DOE. I've worked with you, you've been amazing. Your team has been very responsive, but we are in a crisis. And every time we talk about educational funding, we nickel and dime, even though it's half of the state budget, to the point that some public officials publicly say we need to push the envelope just a little. And the first thought that comes to their mind is reducing funding for education at a time when we're going through a crisis. So I appreciate your forward thinking. I appreciate that we need to invest in early learning education, because investing in high school alone and not investing at the front end of the educational system is not going to do any good. So it has to be a comprehensive strategy. So again, thank you for your service. I look forward to working with you on all of these issues.
Thank you for your comment.
Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple quick questions. Do you have a tuition support percentage that you would like to see?
I would like to see the December revenue report, which I have not laid my eyes on. And partly why is because I think one of the reasons I respect you as a taxpayer as much as anything is because we live within our means and we're fiscally responsible in Indiana. And I really, really appreciate that. So as soon as I lay my eyes on that report, I'm going to be as aggressive as you can imagine to get that money into education. But it starts with me seeing good data.
And that would be proposed in the governor's budget?
The governor will propose that amount, yes.
That you, okay, and one more.
And I'll work directly with the governor as well as the budget team.
Okay, one more question.
Yes, sir.
I didn't see anything in regards to refunding the complexity index. I was a little disappointed by that. So I think that's something that you and I have talked about, and I'll leave that for other conversations. But I'd like to see the complexity index addressed again here in the state of Indiana. Thank you.
And I appreciate you saying that, Representative Porter. I did appreciate the conversation we had. I did not intentionally, because I respect the education. We fund the education as half of the state budget. The complexity index is in with CTE, with special education, with foundation, all of which we will eagerly be ready to talk about this coming session. And I look forward to that as well. Thank you.
Anyone else? Since everybody's talking about money, I'll just tell you, so when I go home, this is what I hear. We invest more and more money in K-12, but all we read about is how the kids are performing worse. And there's a decline in the performance. So how do you answer that?
I had 30 minutes today to answer it as much as I could. I think we have time on the schedule, Senator, and I'll book extended time to talk about how I think as schools, and by the way, to be clear, no one, when you sign up to be a teacher, an educator, you want to do everything you can to help every child in your class. It is a calling for most of us, for all of us. And so we've launched a number of tactical supports for our schools. And again, glad to get into more detail. And we're also always open if there are things that we're missing. I mean, we're a humble crew. If there are things that we're missing, we're always willing to attack that based on ideas that come from local communities.
Well, it's just the number one high-level question that I'm asked when I go
Yes, sir.
home.
I understand.
All right, anything else? All right, thank you.
Thank you very
All right,
much.
so we can't take a full hour, so we're going to come back at 1:15. So we'll give an extra 15 minutes.
Thank you.